From the Flint Hills Writing Project, this is the Suggestion Box, where teachers get ideas. I'm your host, Andrea Marshbank. Today we're here with Annie, Brock, and Heather Hundley. We're going to talk a lot about growth mindset, which is one of my favorite things to learn about because it's one of those concepts that I know that I can do better, but I'm absolutely in love with. Like, it's taken me a while to watch the language that I use to promote growth mindset, and I've read their book, The Growth Mindset Coach, which is extremely applicable to the classroom. A lot of great ideas there, and it was actually what prompted me to ask them to come on to the podcast today. They also, just a heads up, do have an additional book, The Growth Mindset Playbook, as well, and they're going to talk a little bit at some point during this podcast about another growth mindset helper that they're going to come out with, and we're just really excited to have them on here. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Hi, Annie. Hi, Heather.
Hello. Hey, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So can you give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself and education, and just give them a sense of where you're from?
So this is Heather, and I previously have taught kindergarten, first grade, third grade, and then title reading at K-5 level. Currently serving as an assistant principal and curriculum director, but will be moving forward to be a middle school principal in the next year.
This is Annie, and I began my adult working life as a writer, and so I was a writer for about 5 or 7 years, and then I got into education. And got another degree in secondary English. I taught secondary English, then I moved on to the library, and now my official title is Innovation Specialist. So I've done a few different things.
Awesome. I didn't realize you had a background in secondary English.
Yes.
That's really exciting. I bet that your background in writing helped a lot when writing a book.
Yeah. It was key for sure.
Yeah. And so how did you two come together? Maybe how did you two meet, and then how did you get so attached to the idea of the growth mindset? What about that resonated with you?
Well, we were working in the same school district, but prior to that, I had taken a few years off teaching to stay home with my kiddos, and I was picking up freelance writing work because I'd worked as a writer before. And one of the jobs I picked up was writing a small instructional manual about Google Classroom, because when I had been teaching, I had Google Classroom had just come out, and I was kind of the person in my district who was using it and teaching it to other people. And so when I took a year off, I wrote this little instructional manual about Google Classroom. I actually answered an ad on Craigslist to do it. So,
nice.
Yeah. So I answered. I didn't know if it was legit or not, but I wrote the people kind of blindly on Craigslist, and it ended up being this kind of indie publisher in Berkeley, California. And so I did the project, and then they came back and said, we're interested in publishing more education books. You want to write one? And at that point, I'd been in education only about 3 years, and so I didn't feel, I had ideas, and I'm super passionate about it, and especially about writing about education, but I knew I needed some help in terms of developing ideas and really kind of getting another person who was kind of a master level teacher. And Heather was in my district, and her reputation preceded her. She's kind of a teacher that people are like, oh, you've got to talk to Heather. She's so great. And then we met, and I loved her. And then so when I got the opportunity to write another book, I said, can I have a co-author? And they said, sure. So I asked Heather. We didn't really know each other that well.
I just
emailed her and said, do you want to write a book with me?
And you said yes?
I did. Well, Annie...
Thankfully, my reputation didn't precede me. You would have said no.
No. We had worked together on some professional development in our district and loved Annie. Very innovative, lots of great ideas, and really... just growth mindset was already part of her language. While she may not have said yes, that was something that she necessarily was projecting or thinking a lot about, she definitely, there wasn't anything. We'd throw out a challenge or an idea, and Annie was the first to jump on it, and like, we can figure it out, and we'll try it, and it could fail horribly, or it could be successful, but let's do it together. So
we decided to do it. We didn't know what we wanted to write about, and the publisher was like, make a list. So we sat down and we made this big long list of all the different things we might want to write about, and growth mindset was on the list.
Yep.
And
we previously read Carol Dweck's book.
Yeah, we had both read it at different points in our lives. And so we knew what it was, and kind of knew the basics of mindset, and we knew it was gaining traction in education, that people were talking about it. And so that was on the list, and we kind of winnowed it down, and of the things that we wanted to write about, we felt could be like sustainable through an entire book. And we landed on this topic of growth mindset. And so we just spent 6 months kind of, digging into it and coming up with, in the book is structured, the Growth Mindset Coach, our first mindset book, it's structured. We use the idea from, have you read The Happiness Project?
No, but I've read stuff by the author who wrote The Happiness Project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, she also has a great
Rubin.
podcast.
Yes, she does.
Gretchen Rubin. And she had tried different strategies. Like once a month, she'd try like a happiness strategy that people talk about. And we just really like that idea of like, once a month, let's try something. And then so that's what we did. We structured the book like a monthly. So every month you work on a new strategy that's in relationship to developing a kind of a growth-oriented classroom that fosters growth mindsets among your students. And, and the idea was at the end of the 12 months, you'd have kind of this holistic approach to growth mindset that you could go in with the next year, because you've learned bits and pieces throughout the year. And so that was kind of the idea. And we just wrote it and sent it out into the universe, and we really didn't know what would happen, but we've been really excited and pleased that so many people, it's been really humbling to see people just from all over the world reading these ideas, and we're big believers in growth mindset. It's been awesome.
And I just, as we were talking about it, when we were coming up with our list, this was something that I had been implementing in my classroom, some different strategies, and with kindergartners, and it truly was amazing, just between what I was seeing with kindergartners, what I was seeing with their parents, and then just that educational circle around, my team, the people that I was working with. While I don't know that we were, years prior calling it growth mindset, some of the things that we were doing, were definitely interrelated to growth mindset language and practices, and so just really saw the benefits of what was happening in a classroom with 5 and 6-year-olds. It was really impressive and amazing, and listening to them carry that out, and parents reaching back out saying, oh my gosh, this is what my student or my child has said to me tonight, and just a totally different way of looking and reframing things. And so if you can capture that with 5 and 6-year-olds, I think it's really important, just a lifelong skill of, this is how we approach difficult or challenging, activity, or something along those lines within your life. This is how we can approach it, and this is how we can move past it.
Yeah, I think that in education, there's a lot of things that we teach kids that are kind of like, I think of like Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid. Right? Like I'm going to teach you how to write this formal academic essay that may or may not have 5 paragraphs, and like you can use these skills other ways, but like the growth mindset checks all the boxes of like, no, you can use this like all the time. Right? Like there's not like specific skills, or I'm not teaching you flexibility, or I'm not teaching like there's, and that's not to knock teaching 5-paragraph essays, folks. That's a different conversation. But I think that's like you found a classic thing that we should already consider doing, and you took it to you made it very applicable, because for those of you who are our listeners that haven't read Carol Dweck's book, The Growth Mindset, it is very research heavy, which is awesome, because we need research in our everyday. It's important that we do research-based practices, but the book that Annie and Heather have written is a much more bite-sized. Like, it's a much more consumable version of what Adwek was talking about originally.
And really, the idea of growth mindset in and of itself is super simple. Growth mindset is the belief that you can, with hard work and effort, that you can overcome challenges and obstacles and learn and grow, right? Super simple. A fixed mindset on the other side of that coin is the belief that people can't really meaningfully change their skills, abilities, talents that much. Essentially the God-given talent idea. And so that's a simple idea. And so it may seem like, how can you fill an entire book or 2 books with ideas that are surrounding that? But it's amazing how many things that we do to sabotage those simple beliefs in our classroom. And also how many soft skills and strategies just are really tangentially related to this idea of mindset and can play a role. Like in our newer book, the Growth Mindset Playbook, we talk about this idea of shaming kids and how shame can instill fear in kids to take educational risks. So we point at strategies like behavior charts, for example, which are kind of going by the wayside anyway, or other kind of shaming type strategies that schools have used. And we talk about, so how can we, in an environment where a kid's name is written on the board, or he has a red check by his name, or Susie has a gold star and so has a green star, whatever that means, and like, how can we expect in that kind of environment for a kid to have a growth mindset? We can't, because the whole idea is believing in yourself to grow and get better. And so if we're setting up these classroom environments where kids don't feel free and like they can take a risk to learn something new or to get out of their comfort zone, I mean, we're doing them a disservice, number one, but second of all, they're never going to be able to develop a growth mindset. And so both of our books are just all about fostering because you can't make someone else have a growth mindset. Like, I can't say, okay, everyone's going to have a growth mindset today. That's what we're doing. That's a personal choice. And believe me, there are plenty of things in my life I have a fixed mindset about. I mean, it isn't like, oh, I have a growth mindset all the time about everything. And in fact, if someone says that, that's a red flag. But, so both books are just about fostering a classroom environment where everyone has the best opportunity to develop their growth mindset and just to take those risks and to lay aside, fears, because fixed mindset is all about fear, and to flourish and grow. And so, you can fill 1,000 books with strategies that do that. We just kind of pinpointed a few. And like Heather said, we were doing these things before we were using the words growth and fixed mindset. And I think lots of teachers are, because tons of teachers say, I was already doing this, but I didn't really have a name for it. So now I have a name and some science behind it. And, it kind of validates what they've been doing. And on the other side, teachers will say, oh my God, I did not realize these words I've been speaking and saying. And one of my big ones is I'm really guilty, or was really guilty, of when a kid was struggling with something. Come on, you can do this. It's easy. Well, no, it's not easy for that person. And so the words that I was using, that come on, you can do it. It's easy. Just try. It's easy. Well, I wasn't speaking to where that person was in their learning or how they were feeling about the task or challenge. And that's just one thing I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize when I say this is easy, I thought I was being encouraging and like opening a gateway to learning. But what I was really doing was saying it's easy for everyone. So the fact that it's not easy for you is, something's wrong with you, clearly.
And then you solidify their self-image.
Their self-fear.
Yes. And so it's even like little tweaks like that you can make, and that I've made, and I'm sure Heather's made.
Well, I think that is, helping kids to understand what are the goals that you may need to set, what are the barriers that may get in the way, what happens when you're a fixed mindset. Like, you may be charged and ready to go with a growth mindset feeling and message, and this is how you're going to approach something, but potentially it's, at some point you may have to counter that with your fixed mindset message, that what is the self-talk that you have. And so helping, I think having the language around it and being able to help kids with providing them the tools and some skills and walking them through the steps of, here's a goal. This is something that, maybe at one point felt like they couldn't achieve it. These are the barriers or limitations that may be, existing. What is it going to look like when I come across these? What am I going to do? How am I going to get over them? What are the steps that I need to take? What's that effort, hard work, other strategies? And, even with 5 and 6 year olds, we did a lot of goal setting and making sure that, if they couldn't have that foresight for what's going to potentially happen, kind of crafting that. Well, what do you think some other things, as we're having these conversations about goals and things that they want to achieve, what are some things that they're going to have to do? And so I think they feel empowered, and when, you can put that information or put those strategies in place for students, like we talked about earlier, it's a life skill. It's something that they can apply to many facets in their life and things along the way. So, changing your talk, changing your self-talk, thinking about those, very vague praises that we get. Oh, you're so smart. That's another one. Just, what we're saying to students and how we're helping them basically shape their own mindsets.
Yeah. So. I think that I've been reading a lot of books about leadership lately, and teachers aren't leaders in the classroom. I don't know who is anywhere ever, but one of the things they talk about a lot, like across the board, is that we only have our words and our behaviors. Like there's nothing else that changes the world around us. Like that's all we've got. And so it makes me think, by your discussion about the words we use with our kids, like in our heads it might be like, I've been guilty of being like, oh, like it shouldn't matter that I said like that was easy, or that I said good job, or you're so smart or talented, or any of those very like fixed things. Like initially when I was reading your book, there was a lot of skepticism that was like, does this really matter? Does this one moment that I speak to them? And I think overarchingly, like the answer is, based on like lots of research, the answer is yes. Like it does. It affects so incredibly much. Like, and I think about this in reference to math a lot.
Definitely.
I feel like math is something that our students, like, and across like K through 12, K through 16, K through like 65, we're all like,
I personally am guilty of being like, I'm not a math person.
Yeah.
I thought that for a really long time. And in fact, I was able to trace back. I loved math right up until the 5th grade. I remember this really distinctly. There was like a math team, like a mathletes type team that went and took tests, and I tried out for it and I didn't get it. And I just remember that as the point where I really stopped liking math. And I think like I had a fixed mind. I failed, and I thought, well, forget this. I'm just going to focus on writing, or I'm just better at English. It was like a self-comfort thing. And so I just decided then, well, I'm just not a math person because I didn't make this team. In reality, I probably did great on the test. I probably showed a lot of good learning and good math on the test. I just didn't get the high enough score to be a part of the team. And, I let that overcome. And Jo Bowler, who is kind of like the goddess of mathematical mindsets, she writes a lot. She has a cool website called U Cubed that has awesome strategies for math teachers, written several mindset books about mindset mathematics, because that is, you hit the nail on the head. That is a huge area. Although in our area of English, I think it's also really pervasive, that attitude of like, I'm just not a reader. I'm just not a good writer. I'm just not creative. I hear that one all the time. I'm just not creative. Always hear that one.
Yeah.
And, we have to really work hard to illustrate that connection, the link between effort and achievement, effort and growth, right? Hard work and growth. Because people like me in the 5th grade, I may have done awesome on that. I may have scored higher on that test than I had on any other math test. I didn't know. All I knew was that I didn't make it. And so for me, I was measuring myself against other people, right? Because it was a competition. So I was measuring myself against other people. When in school, we really just need to be, the only person you need to be better in school is better than you were yesterday, right? Just better than yourself all the time.
Sure.
And that's the idea of growth mindset. And we really need, in school, we really fall prey to this, we celebrate we've got the honor roll, we've got, the straight A students, and, a lot of times our straight A students really aren't challenged that much in school. They're on a different they're on a different level, and we're doing as much of a disservice to them by not challenging them as we are to the kiddos who are struggling to get the work done. And so a lot of our ideas center around like standards-based grading, or being able to recognize growth, being able to train parents to see like your kid had a 62% in science last quarter. They're up to a 74. And to you, that looks like a C, and you may not be happy with that, but look at that incredible growth. And let me show you how your student developed and grew in this period of time. Let me show you the goals they had and how they worked to achieve those goals. And I think that's more of the language we need to be talking, to speaking to parents and to kids, so they can see the clear path from effort to achievement. And we don't. We often just kind of highlight the superstars, and we don't, maybe you can speak a little bit to this, Heather.
Well, I think you're right on, just with, the students who are achieving sometimes typically aren't challenged, or that we're seeing, making straight A's, or that are in our gifted programming. Those are, Carol Dweck writes about this, what happens when they're given a challenging task, and if it's too difficult, then they don't want to do it, because they have the self-image that it should be easy. Everything has been easy. It's come easy to me. I don't, if it doesn't come easy, then their fixed mindset certainly starts taking over, and they start feeling really, they hear that self-talk with the negativity. I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. If it's too hard, I shouldn't have to work at it because I haven't previously had to work at it. It's been an easy task for me to be able to handle. And so I think Annie's right on when she said the smart, our highly high achievers are students that sometimes have more difficulty with overcoming their fixed mindset.
I had a group. We were doing a STEM challenge. You had to build a bridge or what was it? Geesh, I'm trying to remember. You had to build, it was like Christmas time, and I had this little like weighted Santa Claus, and I gave them some tools, some note cards and foil and tape, and they had to build a chair that would hold the Santa Claus out of these like limited materials. And we just I randomly chose groups, and two boys who, one was in the gifted program, another high achieving boy, got paired up together, and they started working on it. And, they were like kind of iterating and making different chairs to see what would work. And time was drawing to a close, and they saw the writing on the wall that their chair wasn't going to work, the design they'd come up with. And basically they dismantled instead of kind of trying to fix what they'd done, when they saw they weren't going to win, essentially, or be able to hold the Santa, they dismantled it, and they like made a funny sculpture out of it that didn't even have anything to do. And I just thought, wow, that's fixed mindset, because instead of, reckoning with the challenge and reckoning with the idea that you weren't going to be able to meet the challenge this time, they just avoided it altogether. Right. They just decided they were going to do something totally different because they weren't going to manage the challenge. And so that type of avoidance behavior, I think, can be really common, especially among high achievers. They're just like, we're just not going to do it because I'm too scared.
Yeah, and I think that it's maybe in a lot of ways, maybe like very refined fixed mindset, because it's rather than failing because we tried so hard but still didn't make it, right? Because we've got that word fail attached to it. Like we're gonna fail, but it's like because we meant to. Like we were on a totally different stratosphere, right? Like
if you think about the function of behavior, it's behavior is a form of communication. So thinking about, are they avoiding, are they escaping, and then what's the underlying, what's the root of that? And I do think, while it may not be explosive behaviors that you're seeing, that some of those internalizing behaviors where we'll just, like you said.
And that was it. They made a big show. Well, we didn't even try. We didn't care about this. And they really did care about it the first 15 minutes when they were working really hard. They decided not to care about it and kind of armor themselves against the failure, just like you said. Like, we didn't even really bother with this. That was their strategy total fixed mindset about that challenge. And I even took him aside and I said, when you did that, when you decided, why did you do it? And got them to say, well, it didn't work and it wasn't going to happen, and we just decided to do something funny instead. And I said, well, what, I talked to him about mindset. I said, well, what you did is to avoided the challenge. When you have challenges in your life and they're not going to go your way, are you just going to give up and quit? Make a joke, do something funny, and they really, I think it resonated with them. It was a small, simple thing, but I think it was a really teachable moment, because we shouldn't, punish kids for having a fixed mindset for sure. I think you just turn it into a teachable moment and say, this is what you did, and you may not know why you did it, but I see why you did it, and you did it because you felt scared and you felt like you weren't going to be the best and you felt like a failure. And to cope with that, you did something silly instead. And you don't want to do that when you run into other challenges in your life. You want to hit them head on, and if you fall off the horse, you want to get back on. And so, I don't know, I thought it was a moment to me that really illustrated like how, as a teacher, I can see opportunities, a fixed mindset at work, and kind of go in and have the conversation and get kind of kids to see that, what their fixed mindset, what consequences that had, and what they could do next time.
I think that it's important that we, like you said, like when you get angry with students who exhibit this fixed mindset, like you create a sort of, especially with my high schoolers, like I teach 9th grade, and so they're at this point in their life, and it's an understandable point. I do this still as an adult sometimes, where learning can be uncomfortable. So when if I pull them aside and explain, hey, like we were doing this breakout box, and you knew you weren't going to be like the first place winner, so you just full on stopped for the last 10 minutes of class. And so you just like completely dropped the ball, and like whatever learning opportunities, you missed those because you decided you couldn't do it, and like talk about the flaws in that. And I think that sometimes maybe teachers avoid that conversation for a lot of reasons. One is like time, right? We need more hours in the day overall, but not the work day. Don't get me wrong. But also like the other problem with that is that it's really uncomfortable to learn sometimes, like to like over those moments that we think back to that a teacher talked to us, like pulled us out in the hallway and was like, hey, I saw your chair didn't work. What happened there? Those are really maybe even like a little bit, I don't want to say painful, because it's all just emotions that are uncomfortable but not necessarily bad. But yeah, maybe it's important that we have more of those.
Well, it's truly easier to be punitive and be like, you didn't participate, 10 points off today. That's easy.
Yeah.
What's hard is to recognize those moments and for what they are, to have empathy, to like say, I understand this because I've been in a position where I really wanted to win something and I wasn't going to get there. And I get it sucks. I understand that. But here's a better way to grapple with that. Let's talk about how we can, that's the harder thing to do. And, I think we really get wrapped up in being like punitive for moments of like psychological, where we have like that beautiful opportunity, like the breakout box. Totally experience that with breakout boxes. Give up because I'm not going to win. That is just like such a classic scenario that probably presents itself in a billion different ways all across the world every day, where instead of just, going into discipline mode, you have an opportunity to have a conversation about why. Because, think about your own behavior. Do you always know why? Do you think about the why of everything that you do? I act out or do things or blame someone or have behaviors. I don't necessarily think about why I'm doing it, and if I did, I probably wouldn't do it. But just to like have that moment where you talk to someone about like, can you see this? Because I need you to see this. And not even just like, you've got high school kids, we deal with elementary students. I have even presented to adults. I presented on growth mindset or fixed mindset in technology to teachers, to like tech people.
Oh, that's important.
And I said, I kind of presented archetypes, like Susie doesn't want to learn something new, and Danny, I already know everything, you don't have to, or like all these different archetypes of ways that teachers like try to avoid doing technology, or like being open to new ideas like that. Like it never works for me or whatever. And I said I kind of flicked through these like little caricatures, and I said every single one of these is fear. Fear of not being good enough, fear of failing, fear of not being on the cutting edge, fear of the unknown, fear of getting out of the comfort zone. It is all fear. Fixed mindset is all fear. I mean, that's where it's so, you know, in that place of fear. So I don't know, you really have to address that and kind of end up, you know, tackle that with kids and talk about it, or else they're not going to get it.
And I think that comes back to the strategies that we want to make sure that we're able to give to teachers is, you know, formulating that language, practicing it yourself, making sure that you're really taking the time to recognize and even allowing students to be able to, you know, whether it's through literature or through video or role playing, but just giving them an opportunity to name it and, hey, that this is fixed mindset. This is what it looked like in the story that we read today. This character did, you know, X, Y, and Z, and so that's another strategy is just developing that language with your students, talking to them about productive struggle, and sometimes it feels really uncomfortable, and self-reflection with those behaviors, and providing that just the opportunity to teach and share. This is what happened to me. This is what I recognized when I was reflecting. Has that ever happened to you before? Giving students an opportunity to think about and wonder, and provide here. This would have been a better way.
Yeah, sharing your failures. I mean,
yeah, definitely sharing what the things that you've gone through and how you've either recognized that at this time I really didn't have a growth mindset. I didn't take that approach. I took more of a fixed mindset approach. But when this opportunity, if it comes around again, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to approach it differently. Talking about brain plasticity and how our brains function and what's happening when things are difficult. Annie has a great story that we put in the book about To the Meadow, and just providing a lot of opportunities to share things like that with our students. I think those are the really easy strategies that teachers can take right now into their classroom tomorrow. Is just sharing and reflecting and thinking about what is the function of the behavior, what's the language that you're going to put around it, and how do you help to start formulating that for your students to carry over into their own personal lives, and then outside of even outside of school.
Our book is like the month by month book, and so we are often asked like, okay, what if I pick it up in March but it starts in August? And we always just say start with what is growth mindset and what does that look like in our brains? What's the physiology of growth mindset? Because I think number one, just naming growth and fixed mindset just opens your eyes. It's like, what is it called? Bader Meinhof, when you learn about something and then you start seeing it everywhere. You get a car or something, and then all of a sudden everyone has the car.
You're like waving on the highway.
It's been drawn to your attention, right? And so when we learn about something new, we start seeing it everywhere. And that's how I was with growth mindset. Once I learned what it was, I started seeing it all the time, everywhere in my life. And so number one is just teaching kids what growth, even kids as young as kindergarten can understand what growth and fixed mindset are. My son, well, of course, he's my son. And so we spend a lot of time talking about growth mindset. I forgot what movie we were watching. I wish I remember, but I said, I love that movie. What did you think the message was about? And he's like, let me guess, growth mindset. And I was like, you're right, it was. And so, as Heather was saying, and then the second thing I think, especially for kids who are more skeptical, and you said even at first, like you felt skeptical. I did too. I'm a skeptic. I need science and evidence to believe that something's going to work. And so I think teaching kids the brain science is super important. Like and in the book we say it's so funny, millions and millions of people come together every day for the purpose of learning, but we rarely talk about how that actually happens in our brains and what the physiology of learning is. And like you said earlier, learning is uncomfortable. Well, I try to tell my students, like, when you're hungry, what happens, right? Your stomach starts growling, you get hangry, you know, there's all these like physical responses to hunger. Learning has physical responses too. You get frustrated, you get angry, you get, you know, like that frustration with learning, that is your brain is being like, don't know this path. I haven't done this before. And it is your brain saying like, haven't done this. I'm going to be slow with this. And so
maybe go a different way.
Yeah. Can we connect this to something else? You know, it really is. Your body's response to learning something new is struggling and frustration. So I said, just like when you're hungry, your tummy growls. When you're learning, you feel frustrated. That's your body saying like, I'm learning. This is hard. And so I think it's really important to teach kids that, because a lot of people think if I'm frustrated and I can't get it, I'm stupid.
Yeah.
But the truth is, when you're frustrated and you can't get it, you just haven't like carved that path, and you haven't made that connection in your brain. Once you make it and make it and make it and make it and make it, you're gonna be super fast at this. This is what learning is. And I don't think kids especially realize that's what that is.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of conversations to be had here about the biological like kind of idea of like that nature versus nurture kind of moment. Because in my head, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the nature part of that argument seems very like fixed mindset, whereas the nurture, right, like you can build your own path based with this mindset. And so I think that those conversations can definitely be like applicable across the board and in many different venues, right? Like talking about those cues that are you learning. I do wonder, so Kansas, for those of you who are listening who aren't in Kansas specifically, and I think across the US, there's been this huge push for social and emotional learning. Just like across the board, where like in Kansas specifically, our Kansas State Department of Education does this great presentation where they talk about how like they surveyed a ton of businesses in Kansas, and like 80% not 80%, they were like, what do you want your future employee to know? And it was like 80% of the skills they needed were social and emotional, and the other 20 were academic. And so it was there's this overarching push for Kansas to like, we really need to be hitting the social and emotional, because that's what's going to get our kids jobs. It's going to get them ahead in the world. And so how do you see the growth mindset interlinking with that idea of social and emotional learning?
Well, I think it's definitely something that we both in the growth mindset playbook we actually write about, because there is such an interconnection there with how do we help students, number one, understand more about their brains, help them to learn more about the fixed and growth mindset messaging and how to take on those challenges, but also just what is the function of their behavior, and being able to identify, you know, potentially like Annie was speaking of earlier, that, you know, when I'm learning something new, this is what it feels like, this is what it sounds like. It could be uncomfortable, it could be messy. So there's that component of it, but then there's also the understanding what other people might be going through and how we can help to be more empathetic, help students to realize what approach could be taken through more of a growth mindset message. And then
I also think problem solving is huge here. Just like when I do coding with kids, I think that's a really good opportunity to talk about. I see a lot of fixed mindsets happening when we're doing coding, because it's like you try something, it doesn't work, you go back to the drawing board, you try again. It's kind of like going, and I see a lot of those social emotional skills that we need to build at play when we do coding, because you fail, you grapple with like it didn't work, you've got this challenging work ahead of you, you may need to reach out to someone and ask them for help. You may not, and I think what you were saying, and I've seen the presentation that you're referencing, but like those skills, I think that's just absolutely right on, because we can learn how to do anything like content wise, and truly in the classroom, to me, the content is less relevant than like what you're learning about yourself as a learner, how to learn. I mean, so much of school is, for better or for worse, is like how to do school, right? And so a lot of times that can be detrimental, because how to do school is super different from how to do life. But I think we really have an awesome opportunity to like develop those skills that are so highly sought after. So problem solving, and so many of them are just kind of in this like same arena as growth mindset. So like like how to solve problems, how to work with other people, interdependent. We talk a lot about interdependence and treating other people with empathy and respect, and what that looks like, and being able to take blame for something and have accountability for something. And those are all skills that kids are learning in school, or could be learning in school, that immediately translate to no matter what you end up doing. Because truly, I mean, you get your specialized education later on, whether that's vocational school or college or whatever, your specialized training for the job that you're going to have, or even on the job training, that's going to come at your job. Content is, I mean, we know, hit or miss. And in English, we choose books that, there's no, I mean, we have a method. Or in history, you can't teach the breadth of human history, right? You have to zero in on a few things. And the content is important, but is it as valuable as kind of how to speak, how to listen, how to read for information, and kind of those other things. So I think it's right on that Kansas is focusing on those social emotional skills that are so critical.
They are.
We tell a story in the Growth Mindset Playbook. Have you heard the TED Talk? I think Margaret Heffernan is her name, and she tells the story of a scientist in the 70s named William Muir, and he wanted to do, I forgot, he was doing research, I think on was it like what is it called when you, like, not ethnic cleansing, but when you breed for the best traits? What Hitler
eugenics.
did. Yes, yeah. I think that's what he was studying. And so he took groups of chicken. He wanted to make like a super flock of chickens, essentially. And so he took he took this idea, or he wanted to make this super flock of chickens. And so he had a group of chickens for like 6 generations. He started with one, I don't know, what are a group of chickens called? A gaggle? A thatch? I forget what they're called. A flock. A flock. Okay, so I said super flock and then I missed it. Okay, so he took the best layer, because how do you measure how good a chicken is? Egg production, right? So he took the best egg layers, and he pulled them out, created their own flock, let them go for like 6 generations, and then he had a control group, was just kind of the natural, organic flock that happened. And at the end of like the 6th generation of chickens, this super flock that he had created, of the, I don't know how many chickens there were, like 12 chickens, 3 were alive, but they had all their I mean, you should see pictures of these chickens. It's disturbing. They had all their feathers plucked out because they were attacking each other to like be the best, right? So he did create the super chicken, but what happened was, like, in this culture of super chickens, they were all attacking each other. Well, when you want to be the superstar, in order to be the superstar, you have to be better than everybody else, right? In any culture, which requires you to show that you're better than other people. Whereas in this other flock, when they're all just kind of coexisting, working together on this common mission to lay eggs, they were flourishing, their production was up, they were all alive and fully feathered.
It's the goal.
And
it's the goal.
and what he really created was this really interesting scenario where we can see play out when you only choose the geniuses or the superstars. What's going to happen in that group of people? Well, like, so many teachers might say, oh, I would give anything if I had just a classroom full of superstars, right? Or the smartest kids in the school in my class. But what would end up happening, the competition would breed, all sorts of insecurity. They would be, there would be infighting, there would be competitiveness, that we all wouldn't be working. So our idea, I'm not articulating this very well, but what we talk about in the book is like creating this culture of independence, this idea that teaching kids right away, like everyone in this room has something to offer. We all have to count on each other to work towards our common classroom missions. And then we each have our own particular learning goals. And your learning goals look differently than the person sitting next to you, and that's totally fine. And my goals for being in here look different from what your goals, my goal as the teacher is different from what your goals are. And, we all have, maybe someone needs to work on just learning to be a better friend. And maybe someone needs to develop their math skills. And maybe, we all have like that different those different personal goals, but our job also is to come together as a team and support each other in achieving those goals. And so I think creating that kind of that interdependence, and I think this is an idea that is making gains in like businesses as well. Like companies have realized that selecting out the superstars isn't benefiting companies. Like it's not the best practice. The best practice is selecting for diversity and different traits and people who can work together and be supportive and be interdependent and kind of create that atmosphere instead. That is the most successful and definitely what we should be doing in the classroom.
So going off of the chicken story, which I love in so many different ways, like that's from your book, The Growth Mindset Playbook, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So is there like the Growth Mindset Playbook, how does it different from the Growth Mindset Coach? Like what does it offer teachers as resources to use?
So it really does get a little bit more depth with the social emotional learning, some of the components of teaching empathy, the positive interdependence that Annie spoke of earlier, and then just engagement, metacognition, some of those components that we didn't necessarily, while we maybe have highlighted them in the Growth Mindset Coach, we took a little bit of a different turn with the playbook in which we were able to dive in a little bit deeper with some of those social emotional components. So
one of the things, as Heather talked about, we talked about increasing engagement in schools. And one of the stories that we tell, which I really enjoyed, is like a lot of that I enjoyed learning about was a lot of teachers, and I've been guilty of this myself before when I needed to do something, put something together quickly or whatever, is that we kind of shoot for like, what is the average kid going to respond to? Like we have this archetype of like a 10-year-old kid or a high school sophomore or whatever, and we think, okay, what is this kid going to respond to? And I mean, differentiation, I think, plays into this a little bit too. And this idea that we need to every learner is in a different spot, and we need to meet that learner where they are. And while that makes the job of teaching a lot more layered and difficult, I think it's so valuable to develop relationships with kids and to kind of understand like what their profile is and how you as a teacher can tailor what you're teaching or even teach something to particular students who need it. And one of my favorite stories is there's a Harvard professor, his name is Todd Rose, and he wrote this book called The End of Average, it's an awesome book. He's an education professor at Harvard, and he actually dropped out. He had a 0.9 GPA in high school, and he dropped out of high school and went on to be an education professor at Harvard. He has an awesome story, but in his book, The End of Average, he tells a story that really resonates with me, and I think it highlights one thing that schools and teachers can kind of get wrong. But he talks about in the 1950s, the Air Force was grappling with a lot of pilots were having difficulty like navigating the cockpits, and like accidents were happening because they weren't able to control their planes. And so they wanted to create like this standard cockpit, because they felt like the one that was like, they first designed the cockpit in like the 1920s, and it was just too small. Like people grow, when you go into an old house and like the doorways, you like smack your head on it. Like, who were these tiny people that used to live? But anyway, so they just decided like the average size of people have increased, so we need to increase the size of the cockpit. And so they measured 4,000 pilots on like 10 dimensions. So they took their height, their weight, their chest circumference, their head circumference, and they came up with this quote unquote average sized pilot. And so they thought, okay, most pilots will fall into this average range. So what happened was when they created the average size cockpit, not a single pilot of all the pilots in the Air Force, not a single one fell into the average range in all 10 categories.
That's so interesting.
And in fact, when they tried to find pilots who just fell into the average range in 3 categories of the 10 who were average in 3 categories, 3% of pilots managed to fall into just 3 of those 10 categories. And so what they realized was like people come in all shapes and sizes, and I may have like long legs and then like a bulkier torso and like a bigger head or whatever, there just was no average. They tried to build an average and there was no average. And so what came out of that was adjustable seats and like, you know, things that were more flexible and customizable. And so he kind of draws this distinction like that, he parallels between that and the modern education system. Like our classroom should be like the cockpit of a fighter jet, because kids come in and they don't fit an average profile. He calls it your jaggedness. You know, there are edges and jagged areas of each profile of every kid that's different. We need adjustable seating. We need kids to be able to, you know, we need to be able to meet their needs. And this idea of like an average fourth grader or an average high school sophomore doesn't exist. You know, you may be average in one or two ways, but you know, that's not. So I love that idea of like, you know, and he said, if we ignore jaggedness, we end up treating people in one-dimensional terms. And people are three-dimensional. And so when we look at an average profile, we're looking at a flat one-dimensional profile, and we're ignoring. And truly, I think the other argument is our jaggedness is what makes us special and unique. And the best parts of us are in our jaggedness.
Yeah. So how does how do the resources in the growth mindset playbook that you're giving teachers to help guide them to give their students growth mindset, how does that like allow for student jaggedness? Because the growth mindset in and of itself is a very like, you know, self-reflective, very flexible model. So but what are some things where you allow for that jaggedness?
Well, another area is metacognition. So we talk a lot about, which it, you know, an oversimplified definition of metacognition is learning about learning, you know, learning about your learning. But we also talk about like really dig in and allow students to have some reflection time on how they learn best. And so I think anything that you can customize, you know, that metacognition and thinking about how I learn. In fact, in the book I write about how I learn best, and Heather writes about how she learns best. Totally different. You know, even though we have a lot in common, the way we learn and the way that we learn best, it looks different.
Absolutely. And I think that being a big piece of it is just recognizing that we all do have differences, and how do we work with one another. We were talking about just that classroom, you know, building that community as a whole. How do we help others? How do we recognize that each of us are coming in with a unique set of needs and desires and goals, and so how do you help to coach students through that and help them learn how to coach each other through the difficult tasks that they might be challenged with. So in the playbook, we talk about building positive relationships, again being one of the big
yeah, that's key. I mean, the whole idea of mindset is like the belief in yourself to grow your talents, skills, and abilities. Like, you have to start. If you want kids to believe in their ability to succeed, like they have to believe it coming from you. You know, like you can't fake your belief in your kiddos. And so both of our books, the very first chapters, at the front of each book is like, how do you build relationships with kids? Because that's just key.
Right. They need that validation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's something I think about a lot as an adult, like with my like people who I work with. Like I need their validation in order for me to succeed in a lot of ways. And a lot of ways I'm like, shouldn't I be over that by now? Like, shouldn't I be okay? Like if I sit in a room by myself and I'm like, you're doing good work, Andrea, like shouldn't that be enough? But it's not. You need that pushback that like, oh, okay, somebody believes in me, so I can still believe in me.
Yeah,
definitely.
And I think a lot of teachers, especially like I mean, I had 500 and some kids this year, and that feels overwhelming to try to build relationships. And you know, my way of doing that may look different from and you probably have hundreds of kids that filter through your room every year at the high school level. We give this like kind of good analogy, a little story, like the starfish. It's like a little kind of parable, but parable's the wrong word, but like little anecdote about a guy. He's walking along a beach, and up ahead he sees someone kind of doing something frantically, and he's like, what is this guy doing up here? So he hustles up, and he sees like that's a bunch of starfish have washed up on the beach just for miles and miles. They all washed up. The tide had gone out, and the guy was taking the starfish and throwing them back in the water. He said, what are you doing? And he he's like, I'm trying to save the starfish. And he said, there's thousands and there's miles of beach. There's no way you're ever going to get, you can't make a difference to everyone. And the guy kind of picks up the starfish and chucks it into the water. And he said, made a difference to that one, And I just try to keep that in my heart, because I know, I mean, we have kids who struggle in our school. We have kids who are facing all sorts of different challenges at home in their learning and their social life. And I know I'm going to miss stuff. I mean, I just have to accept that, but I also have to keep my ears on, my eyes on, and if I can grab a starfish when I can and try to make a difference to the one on the one day, I mean, that's the best I can do. And I think every teacher, go to school with that attitude. Teaching in and of itself, that is an overwhelming task. It is mentally draining. It is emotionally draining. You can work 24 hours a day and never be done, which I struggle with teaching. You're never done. That's like there's never an end to it. so it's that's something that's really important to me. Like, just do what I can every day. And I think if teachers show up with that attitude, especially in terms of building relationships, because we've presented at conferences, people say, I have 100 students. How am I supposed to build relationships with every single student? Well, that may not happen. But does that mean you abandon the task altogether?
Right.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Because you never know when you're going to make that difference in someone else's life. And you may never know.
Yeah.
You may never, ever know that one thing that you said or one thing that you did or how you responded to a situation, an opportunity to reflect the impact that ultimately makes in, whether it's a student's life or a colleague's life. You never know.
The ripple effect.
It is
Yeah.
a ripple effect.
And like, you think about like a teacher who said or did something to you that made a difference. Like, if you went and knocked on that teacher's door and said, this time that you did this, that really made a difference to me, the teacher probably like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. I don't remember that, but good.
Yes,
I think that is like perfect illustration of like, we don't know what we say or what we do that resonates, that makes a difference.
Right.
And so we have to be so careful with that and like treat that's an honor.
It is an honor, and it's such an opportunity. And I think surrounding yourself with that language. It's on our refrigerator at home, and my kids know. That one person can make a difference, and everyone should try. Like, truly, it is. It's something that I want my own children to think about daily.
Yeah.
And so it's right there when you get water every day. On the refrigerator. Think about how you can make a difference. And can just be even the smallest thing, but go out there and try.
Yeah, and I think that's really, I have this story that I'm going to self-indulgently tell, so please humor me, I'm so sorry, but it mixes like the relationship aspect of what you were talking about. Like, you don't know which one's going to make a difference, or which like moment, and also in growth mindset. When I was in high school, I was terribly afraid of public speaking, as are most high schoolers, to be fair, right? And so we had to take a required public speaking class, and I did. And my teacher, Mr. Robert Owens, who's still at Washburn Rural High School, I gave this speech that was like medium, right? Like, not good, not bad, like medium level. And he wrote on it, he was like, I think you have a lot of potential. You should consider joining forensics. And I did. And forensics, for those of you who aren't in the forensics and debate community, is a competitive speaking. And it changed my whole life. Like, it was such a big moment. And I'm actually pretty good friends with him now. So I did knock on his door, metaphorically, and was like, hey, do you remember that time you did that? And he was like, God, no. I write a lot of rubrics.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why would I know this one moment? And similarly, like on the other side of that, we have kids who take these moments where maybe they had a fixed mindset and we are very punitive and come down on them very hard.
Exactly.
Yeah, like how we were talking about before, like all we have are our words and our behaviors. Like,
and those negative moments can sit and fester, just like the positive moments sit and flourish. The negative moments can sit and fester. I think Brene Brown, are you familiar with Brene Brown?
No.
She does a lot of work on, she is a researcher at the University of Texas, Austin, and she has written a lot about shame and vulnerability. She has some really awesome TED Talks. And so she researches shame and vulnerability. And I'm going to get this statistic wrong, but I'm going to tell it because it's in the ballpark. But she said, of the thousands and thousands, so a lot of her research is qualitative because she, talks to people about experiential things that have happened in regards to shame and vulnerability. And she said in her thousands and thousands of interviews, something like 80% of adults could pinpoint a moment that they were shamed in school that changed the way they felt about themselves as a learner forevermore. Like, and those moments, I mean, when we have moments of, our brain is kind of like a camera, and when we have moments of powerful emotion, our brain takes a snapshot, and that's how our, that's really what drives our memories, is our emotions. Like, you have a powerful emotion and your brain kind of takes a snapshot of that, whether that's a negative or a positive. That's why you remember your wedding day or the birth of your kids, or also that time that you were like humiliated on the playground. And that's very real, and those moments can, and even shame, like when kids shame other kids in your classroom, and we know you can't prevent that. We talk about building a shame-aware classroom and like recognizing the signs of when kids are feeling shame, or when they're and teachers say, well, one teacher, was doing a presentation, and I was talking about building a shame-aware classroom, and she said, well, if a kid doesn't turn in his assignment and it's late and he gets a 0, and I call him out on that, I'm not going to be sorry for calling him out on that, because he messed up. The kid messed up, and he needs to know about it. So we can't treat everyone with like kid gloves. And I said, okay, what you're talking about is guilt. And there is a difference between shame and guilt. And guilt can be a powerful motivator to change your behavior. And guilt is not necessarily a bad thing. The difference is, guilt is, I did something bad, and shame is, I am bad. And we need to really walk that fine line. Kids can be guilty about things they did, as well they should be, because we're wired for guilt, and those moments of guilt help us change behaviors, and that's really important. But marrying something that you did bad with who you are as a person, that's just like saying you're so smart. That's marrying your achievement on a test with who you are as a person.
That absolutist identity on that fixed mindset.
Right. Yeah. And so when we say things like, you're so naughty, that's like, in me, I'm naughty.
Right.
Instead of like, you did something that was bad, that's guilt. You are bad, that's shame. And we really need to be careful about that. And in the Growth Mindset Playbook, we also talk about, like you were talking about your teacher, and he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but awesome.
Yeah.
We talk about this idea of unconditional positive regard, and just like treating every single person that you come across with unconditional positive regard, because, man, you don't know. You don't know what that thing is going to be.
It is, and very powerful. And kind of reflecting back on Brene Brown's work, just talking even about vulnerability. And sometimes as teachers, we feel like we have to be all-knowing, and that we don't want to mess up in front of our kids. We want to make sure that the lesson goes as planned, with no flops, but inevitably we know that it's going to happen. And so I think we have this great opportunity that we can take in front of our students. And even as presenters, it's not something, you mentioned public speaking isn't something that you previously enjoyed doing. And for a year, that's what I did. I was publicly, going out, teaching, training, definitely something that's completely out of my comfort zone, but being vulnerable in that process, and kind of engaging in that fear, taking it head on, really just was so life-changing for me. And so I think we talk about that in the book as well, with that vulnerability, but going ahead and setting up opportunities in your classroom where, let your kids know, be vulnerable in front of them, and letting them know, see, this is how you can respond. And while you may not always respond with a growth mindset, perception or outlook, taking that opportunity to reflect then later on, if you didn't respond in that way, and you recognize, oh, that was really more of a fixed mindset message that I just sent. This lesson didn't go well. This isn't what I had planned. I'm never doing this again, or whatever the words were that we communicated that day, or the behaviors that we communicated that day. Coming back around and just reflecting and talking to your students about what that message is and what you want them to take away from that is also really important.
Giving those personal anecdotes can be
absolutely very powerful.
Thank you so much, Annie and Heather, for being here today. I feel like this conversation has been wildly productive, and I can't imagine that there's a single teacher who walked away from this podcast not having something to draw from it, because the growth mindset, obviously, as we've been talking about, is is everywhere all the time. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great fun. Thanks. We appreciate an opportunity to be on your podcast. It was so fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing from the teachers and, continuing on our adventure of growth mindset.
Awesome. That's so great. So everybody who's listening right now, make sure you keep an eye out for their new My Growth Mindset journal that's going to come out in November, just in time for Christmas. And also, just again to reiterate, they've got the Growth Mindset Coach, and which is a month by month sort of very applicable to the classroom ideas for how to teach growth mindset, for how to build your repertoire, and then also the growth mindset playbook, which they talked about extensively in the second half of the podcast. So check out all of those texts. We read it as an entire school, like my entire high school read the growth mindset coach, and it was really, really helpful. So I highly recommend it. And if you have any desire to reach out to Annie and Heather, they have been very responsive. Annie actually came and spoke at my school as well. So I'm sure they're very busy, but if they have time to come and speak.
Yeah, we love visiting schools.
Yeah. So make sure to reach out to them because I'm so sure that they would appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening, my listeners of the Suggestion Box. Those of you who listen to the Suggestion Box are like the lifeblood of what make this happen. Thank you so, so much. And please let us know your thoughts, your feelings. Review us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, subscribe. We're also on Google Play, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Hopefully we'll be wherever you can find us as soon as possible on every sort of podcast outlet. But if you just search the Suggestion Box Podcast, we pop right up. Our website is thesuggestionboxpodcast.com. Our email is thesuggestionboxpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any great lessons or units or strategies or anything that you feel like could really benefit other teachers, if they just only knew about it, please let us know. We would really appreciate hearing from you. Also, find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we're just happy to hear from you all the time. Special thank you to Dr. Roger and Heather Caswell, who are the directors of the Flint Hills Writing Project. We talk about them a lot, those of you who have been here for a while, but they make everything about this podcast happen, and I appreciate it so, so much. Also, thank you to our magnificent, fantastic, terrific, just like out of this world graphic designer, Krista McGriff, and shout out to Sonic Tonic Audio, who creates the intro and outro music to this podcast. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. All the thank yous. You are so appreciated, and we will see you next time, teachers.